A good reviewer would do that, yes. I mean, some reviewers, it seems, can be primarily just, box checking, take less of a holistic, risk-based approach, which is kind of has been the trend for some time now. I try to focus on, what is actually important for this particular product, and has that been explored appropriately?
Welcome to CMC Live. This is the show where we discuss CMC regulations and guidances simplified through real-life experiences and risk-based advice. Each episode, we speak with subject matter experts as well as other leading industry authorities. With your host, Ed Narkey.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to CMC Live. This is the start of the NFL season tonight. Is it Titans? No. Chiefs and Texans. Anyway, Brian, who do you have?
Oh, it's clearly the Chiefs.
Chiefs, yeah.
Until somebody knocks them off, it's the Chiefs. Yeah.
Yeah, my son's a huge Chiefs fan. How about you, Miranda?
Raiders? No.
Oh, no. You're one of those.
Hey, I'm not any of those. That's just what my dad liked.
So, yeah, this is a September 10th edition. So today we have Kyriakos Michailaros on the show. And we call him Q. He's not the Q from the Bond films, by the way. He's a drug product subject matter expert, solid oral doses, controlled releases, inhaled products. He's worked on creams, ointments, liquids, tablet formulations of all sorts. 20 years of experience supporting CMO selections. He's been involved with due diligence, process validation efforts, protocols. He's been a person in the plant these days. He holds an MBA in management, undergraduate chemistry from Lehigh University, and he's also very fluent in Greek, apparently. On today's podcast, we'll talk about product development reports, and we'll go over timing and the content, and also some trends in drug product manufacturing in these times of COVID. So Q, let's get this episode started by going into some of your background, how you got started, and get your thoughts.
Well, how did I get started? I loved science from the beginning. I was always a geek and interested in the basic sciences, and going into college, it seemed like to major in chemistry or physics, you kind of have to go all the way. Get a PhD. And I wasn't sure I wanted to go that far right off the bat, make that kind of commitment. So I made a compromise and went into chemical engineering, which, is still pretty science heavy, but I thought it would give me good job prospects coming out of college. And sure enough, I got a job working in pharma right out of college, and I never looked back. It's been over 21 years now.
Q, given the background and the breadth of experience that you have, I had a question. I wanted to know, in your mind, knowing some of the clients we have and some of the work you've done, in your mind, what would you say is an appropriate timing for a development report? And just really, when is it too early? Is it too late? Is it ever too early or late? In your opinion, when is it a good time to start capturing development decisions, experiments, things like that?
That's a great question. I think the approach that is becoming more and more common these days, to basically start off immediately and have it be a working document, is helpful. It saves time. It helps a development program sort of have a reference point to see where they stand, what is left to be done, and summarize the work done so far. As far as too late, I mean, ideally, I think a development report should be in some close to final state at the time of regulatory filing, at the time of NDA filing or ANDA filing, but it's not absolutely necessary. We've worked on many submissions where the source documents, the data that went into the submission was in source documents, and you have to go there and dig them out. It's a little bit more labor and time intensive, and you have lingering questions as to whether or not there was some aspect of development that wasn't captured, some document that isn't in the files shared by the client that you're working with on a submission. I think it's never too early, and ideally you want to have the story of the development program pretty much summarized by the time you're making an NDA submission.
So if you could expand on that a minute. So that's the regulatory piece and what feeds into a comprehensive filing in the development sections. What about on the manufacturing floor? So you've got a process that starts off at a bench scale or a very small pilot scale, and now you're progressing through. I've heard arguments say, well, we're not GMP yet, so we don't really need to have any sort of record of our product development. But at some point, they intend to be that way. So aside from the regulatory benefits of having that, what about on the production side as you move through and ultimately up to validation and CQAs and things like that?
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with the argument that you don't have to summarize non-GMP work, because what the development report and the submission eventually are intended to do is tell the story of the product development. So even though non-GMP batches, may have not have been used, may have not have been evaluated in humans, may have not have gone to clinic, many formulation and process development decisions are based off those non-GMP pilot scale batches. Those quick and dirty batches often determine what excipients you're going to use in your formulation. They determine, if you're making a tablet that uses a granulation, which method you're going to use for granulation, roller compaction versus, for example, fluid bed granulation or something like that. Despite not being GMP, I mean, that non-GMP work steers the program, and for that reason should be captured in a development report.
Fantastic. So would you say that having at least that understanding, obviously there's advantages to having it under one roof and one report, but as you move into validation, creation of the protocol, things like that, do you often go back and refer to that? Or is is there a delineation between at what point we stop looking back at the past? How does the content of that work its way into validation?
I think at the point of validation, you're essentially demonstrating the repeatability and reproducibility of your commercial process. What you're demonstrating it's reproducible relative to is your registration batches, which may have not been at commercial scale. It's very common to do a SUPAC scale up after submission and before validation. So the validations are going to be showing equivalence in process to your registration batches, and your registration batches are going to be the primary reference endpoints in your development report. Once validation is complete, you're generally going to be referencing back to the validation batches. But up to the validation, what you're trying to reproduce are your registration batches.
So Q, I just realized 2 years ago, I wrote this blog. It's still on our website. If you just found it, it's called "Hey Google, Tell Me About the Importance of Living Development Reports." So can you talk to a little bit why, to the points why your development report should be a living document, updated?
It just saves a lot of time. By having your development data and conclusions automatically downloaded to a common document, even if it's not necessarily formatted for flow and such, what you do have is one place that has all of the critical information upon which you're basing your development program. And then you can go back, and if you're having like a meeting with the FDA or you're planning some sort of filing, where to find all of your information, all of the relevant information that you have based your development decisions on. So it really saves a lot of time. It makes it easier for everyone to know where all of the relevant development information is.
So your understanding of the requirements enables you to ensure that the project contains all the needed elements for success. So that's great.
Then to go one step further, you said something that had me pause. I don't know many development programs that have been complete successes at everything they've tried to explore, every avenue in process improvement, process development. How do you handle those things that necessarily didn't work? You know what I mean? You're looking at maybe, sealing pressures, whatever. How do you capture that information? Or is it just wasn't done, move on?
Well, I mean, but a development program, a good development program is going to do risk assessments at certain points along the way and assess for the indication that we're going for the dosage form we're trying to make, what are the major concerns associated with developing this drug product. For example, there's trends in the industry towards going to direct compression formulations for tablets, where basically a bunch of powders are blended and then they're just discharged and run on a press to make tablets, as opposed to a granulation process where all the powders are granulated together to make a different intermediate material. So for a direct compression formulation, the main concern for a potent product would be demixing, content uniformity, and so forth. As long as the primary areas of risk are covered and have been appropriately characterized, namely, if you can demonstrate that your mixing process appropriately mixes your powders and they don't demix during discharge and compression and, across the compression run by, doing stratified content uniformity, you've addressed a major concern for that drug product. If it's, for example, a chewable tablet, hardness is going to be a major concern. So you're going to want to evaluate the hardness of the tablets. But if, for example, there's some data point that you've got along your development program that was out of the ordinary or was unexpected, but it may not have relevance to the quality of the drug product, at that point, it's typically a business decision as to whether or not you want to spend the money to maybe get an answer, maybe get somewhat of an answer. But oftentimes, if the major risks are covered, that's the most important thing. And assuming that all the other regulatory requirements are being met, you can simply move on by assessing what the risks are and making sure that those are covered. And if something's not critical, it can be, delayed for later, or a business decision, or you can make a business decision as to whether or not to pursue it.
That's a good point. So one of the things that we've had a call for with clients, or we'll have a client come in and they'll acquire a product, and let's say they're looking at multiple strengths, and this product's been around forever, and they consider it to be a slam dunk, so to speak. But then they start to run into issues as they start experimenting with strengths and say content uniformity, things like that. You go back to the development report. What do you look for in a comprehensive development report? Because we're talking about this now. I think the importance of development reports has become relevant in the last few years. But in the past, it was, well, this person developed here, then it stayed in their notebooks, and then this one went over here, and they never really talked to each other. So I think the client, this was about 4 years ago, where their weaker strength had issues, had CU issues. And when you go back and look at that development, how can you tell if it does check all the boxes, or if you do have to do additional experiment?
Again, this goes back to what are the major risks associated with the drug product you're developing and the formulation. So in the example of, you're making a common granulation of active that's then being used in a tablet formulation at different levels to produce different tablet strengths. The one variable you have among your tablet strengths is the amount of active that goes in them. So in a situation like that, it's important to see why would the lower strength, for example, be having issues where the others don't. In any situation where you're mixing powders and then compressing them, you run the risk of demixing. So in a situation like that, what I would do is do sieve analysis on the powder blend, from the powder blend of the granulated active subcomponent, and on the overall formulation. What that will tell you is if you have a difference in concentration of active at different particle sizes of your particles. The reason why that's important is because particles tend to demix and segregate based on size. So at that point, if you know that my fine particles are rich in active and my coarse particles have less active, what you want to do is ensure that your fine particles are continuously mixed, are appropriately mixed in the formulation. And that's notoriously difficult to do. Fine particles are known to demix. So by knowing that, okay, this powder that I'm compressing, it's not, it may be uniform in terms of its content, but among the particles inside the powder blend, they vary according to size and concentration. At that point, you've diagnosed your problem, and maybe you have to take additional precautions. For example, another granulation step, or fine-tuning your final blending process to make sure your portion of your particles that are rich in active or, the opposite are maintain uniformity throughout your compression process.
See, I think it's important because this is a prime example where you had early development history, but you didn't quite understand the dosage forms that it was going to wind up becoming. Like that strength that we talk about was added late and then ultimately taken away. So we have had call where clients are still determining their dosage form, right? That they don't quite know which way they want to go. They're dealing with the clinic and marketing and how they want to handle it. So when you look at a development program before that final decision is made, are there standard box checks you look for completeness where you would advise a client, look, understanding that the final dosage form isn't decided, at a minimum, you want to look at A, B, C?
Yeah. I mean, for any potent compound or for any compound where the active is, for any drug product where the active is, say, less than roughly 5 or 10% of the formulation, let's say less than 5% of the formulation, uniformity and demixing is going to be a concern, especially if it's not granulated. This goes back to the product-specific aspect of, approach to taking to development. For that type of product, you're going to want to look very closely at uniformity and make sure that appropriate characterization has been done around the blending, the discharge of the blend, and the compression process, and stratified content across the compression run to show that you're not getting segregation during discharge of your blender into your press. Another example would be, for example, BCS class 3 or 4 compounds that may not be so soluble or so permeable through gastric membranes. For a product like that, your main concern is going to be dissolution, disintegration. For a product like that falls into that BCS class, you're going to want to look very closely at development of the dissolution method and the dissolution data at all stages of development to know that your dissolution isn't changing across scales and that you have it appropriately characterized.
Okay, that was pretty technical, so I'm processing that. I'm not a drug product person. I wanted to bring it back to something regulatory, which I used to be, and applying drug development report information into a module 3. Documentation is very important. It's often overlooked at the outside of a project because of the misconception that you don't need to write things down. You don't need to bring in writers until you're ready to write your NDA. And I think that thinking is a mistake. You probably agree, right? So, your experiences with companies that use disciplined, systematic approaches from the beginning, they use project documentation to drive their approach, their strategy, their story. Can you talk about maybe some efficiencies, cost effectiveness that comes through that versus companies who don't, some mistakes that you've seen?
Well, actually, the norm is to not, have technical writers involved from early in the process. Normally, what we get is a jumble of somewhat organized or somewhat disorganized reports that may or may not be complete. And from that, we're usually, as a CMC consultant, we're usually tasked with piecing together the development story with that, with those documents, and circling back with our clients to ensure that what we have is complete, and so forth. If you're taking the approach of using a working document and just keeping everything in one place, by simply doing that, you're building an efficiency into your development program. You're keeping everything organized, and it's easy to know what's been done, what the data upon which decisions have been based is, and what's missing. Because it's easy to reference the CMC, the ECTD outline relative to your documentation and see what's missing.
Okay, so going back to that succinctness of documentation and being consistent from the beginning kind of emphasizes what you just mentioned there, cost and time savings. In the end, we wind up going back and rewriting things, and that takes time to do that and costs money. So
I think for me, a Monty Python line, and now for something completely different. But there's the regulatory aspect. But let's say some of our clients, their main goal is to take a product so far and sell it, where it may not be that filing. However, the due diligence portion of this is this a fileable project? Is it because the new partner intends to take it on and file? So in a sense of, let's say that's the goal. Let's say the client says, I'm going to take this so far pass the IND, and then we're going to shop this to someone else. Do you really need that development report?
Yeah, I mean, otherwise you're making the due diligence process more difficult, and without a central repository for all of the information, like I said before, the acquiring party is gonna have questions as to what's been done. Is what I'm looking at complete? Questions can arise as to this was done here, but I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what the rationale was. In those situations, I think it's actually more important in a situation like that where you don't want to take a project all the way to completion to have a working document, because you're not then scrambling to get something together that's coherent if and when you enter talks with a potential buyer.
And I think it gives the impression that your program is really in a state of control, even in that early phase.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. Yeah. It's just a more conscientious way to be running your program. And I think, a savvy buyer would be able to recognize that.
Yeah. And it's unfortunately acceptable in many circles and we see it all the time, that I report, when any activities can be created after the activity has concluded, maybe even by folks that weren't involved with the activity.
It's a good point. I think one of the things that we've had a call to do in recent months more than we had in the past is to come into a program that is working towards a filing date. And some of the more forward-thinking, conscientious clients, they want a gap assessment done of their program to really give them an outline of how ready they are for their filing. We've got two camps, right? You have one that says it's time to file, quick, get everything out of the closet, stick it in the submission. There's another that says, okay, we have time here and we want to really get a true understanding of where potential gaps or risks may be to our filing. So when you come in and you represent the technical SME, and let's say we're moving towards an NDA, what do you look for? Because, we talked about your technical experience, but you've got quite a bit of experience in supporting filings as well. Working closely with regulatory to develop those technical sections, to review against the source information. What do you look for in terms of a program and robustness? Regulations are regulations, but as we all know, sometimes they're a bit broad in scope. But now you've got someone like yourself that comes in with experience. What's your approach to something like that?
Well, for that, one thing that I would immediately check for is whether or not, one thing you can't get around it and it could really delay your program is if you have the appropriate stability information. I would immediately check to see if the packaging configuration they have finalized and the formulation they have finalized and the process they have finalized is in fact what's up on stability and what they're basing their expiry dating on. The reason that would be the first thing to look at is because it takes time to acquire stability data. It takes time to make batches and put them on stability. Any remediation of a gap there is going to take some time. So that's what I would look for immediately. Another thing I would look for immediately is whether or not there's any indication of stability issues with the formulation or the dosage form, because that's something that once you file is going to be very expensive to remediate. You're probably looking at refiling at that point, unless it's a very minor adjustment to the formulation. So what I'm looking for are things that will take a long time to remediate if they're not there. Some other things are, have the process control parameters been appropriately characterized? Do they make sense for the drug product and the process that's being used to make it? For example, if it's a direct blend process, is the blender, the blend time, the order of addition, have those all been looked at and shown to be repeatable and reproducible?
So Q, it sounds like I probably from the beginning, you're going to want to talk about with any team or CMO or whomever, you want to talk about like a basic documentation plan, right? You mentioned a few of the steps. So, coming back from the regulatory angle, during examinations, reviews, any products missing any well-documented explanations for decisions or any of the historical chain of events, missing things like that creates issues, creates red flags with the reviewers, right? So not having a plan sounds like you're kind of on the wrong track before you even get to the development report. So can you tell us a little bit, maybe about a documentation plan, maybe when that timing is, when that needs to be updated, key things? You mentioned a few already, key things that you want to get in there, to consider even prior to, when the timing comes up.
Sure. At the kickoff of a project, probably somebody's going to be making a Gantt chart that lays out in broad strokes the entire timeline from, early phase potentially through filing. And some of the milestones along that path are excipient compatibility, finalizing your formulation, end of phase 2, and potentially end of phase 3. So at those points, I think it's important to at least have a report or a risk assessment documenting the data that was collected and the conclusions, the decisions that were made based on that data for the development program. You can have, like I said before, it's common to have your data in disparate reports up until the time of filing. It's better to have them consolidated into a coherent story. But some of the milestones again would be documenting your formulation decisions. So, excipient compatibility or formulation report, a process development report that says, why we chose this process over that. Ideally, a characterization report that outlines what your critical process parameters are and demonstrating you can consistently make the product.
Okay. Any thoughts on product development reports and sections of the module 3, for instance? There's a lot of different conformance information, pretty much the story behind the story in P2, the pharmaceutical development report. Any key areas to think about there?
For me, it would be product specific. A formulation, for example, let's say a formulation has some sort of excipient that's not commonly used. I would look in the P2 sections to clearly explain the rationale and the data upon which decision to use this, non-standard excipient was based. It's really product specific.
That's a great point, though. That's a reviewer's perspective. You'd say, like, if you were looking at this from a reviewer's perspective, you would go right to that or look for that.
A good reviewer would do that. Yes. I mean, some reviewers, it seems, can be primarily just, box checking, take less of a holistic, risk-based approach, which is kind of has been the trend for some time now. I try to focus on, what is actually important for this particular product, and has that been explored appropriately?
Because you never really know the type of reviewer you're going to get.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's science-based.
Yes, absolutely. At the minimum, you need to check the boxes. You need to have the particular issues that are known for that type of formulation, for that type of drug product, for that type of packaging configuration. You need to have those issues pretty well covered, because you can expect them to get scrutiny.
See, and I think that's a really strong point. And that's where, you can have a technical author take source information and plug it into the section as per the guidelines. However, you really need to make sure you need that technical input and oversight in conjunction with regulatory to make sure that the story holds water, to make sure it stands up. And I think that point you just raised is a prime example as to why you do something like that. That's very helpful. Thank you.
All right. I think I have a phone call. Hold on here. Okay. I think it's Miranda Parascandola. She's calling and she has a question for you.
Oh, she does? That's interesting. Did she relay what that was, or?
No. Okay. Welcome, Miranda.
So Q, I had a few questions for you, but you guys kind of laid them out. I was going to ask you if they weren't doing a living development report, compiling it together, piecemealing it from somebody's notebook, somebody's notes, the previous owners. Is that something that they should look at doing? So if they have all of their pieces in different ways, should they pull the puzzle piece together for the agency to review?
I mean, it's rare for the agency to sort of outside of for example, a pre-approval audit where they show up at your door of your manufacturing facility and ask to see those things. It's rare for an agency to request source docs. But I absolutely do think that, at the minimum, if you're not going to have a working development report, what you need to have is a working document repository with a file structure that can be easily followed, so that you can go back and know what you have and piece together a report or a submission from that.
Okay.
That was easy.
Now we get to my favorite part. We switch this up all the time. It's called the lightning rounds. Woo. Q has substantial experience in the manufacturing facilities. Teva and was it King as well?
Yeah, I worked at Poulenc, Rohr, before it was Aventis. I worked at Teva for quite a few years. I worked for a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson called Alza, and then back to a company called Alpharma, which was acquired by King, which was acquired by Pfizer, and then Teva again before getting into the consulting game full time.
So in spirit of the lightning round, we can ask you any technical question about solid orals, process development, anything like that. Any just trends you've seen in the last 6 months, even with the lack of travel and the kind of culture change in the world. Actually, Brian probably can ask better questions technically though. So I'll save my one last one for the end. But Brian, any questions you had about solid orals that you always kind of wanted to know, or maybe just you heard a lot and you just want a different opinion or see what Q's opinion is?
Yeah, no, I think I do. I have a couple. So can you explain to me the term friability and what it means in tablets? I worked a little bit with it, and it's something that I don't know a lot of people know much about it, but it's typically an eyepiece. I mean, it's an in-process control typically, right?
Yeah. So friability is just a measure of the erosion of your tablets during what would be expected to be normal handling. So in order to measure friability, what you do is take a set number of tablets, it's common to do 30, put them in a device that's going to tumble them for a specified period of time at a specified rate. Then you dust them off after that and you reweigh them. Ideally, they weigh pretty close to what they weighed before you tumbled them. But if your tablets are prone to erosion, you're going to get more weight loss. The edges on the tablets are going to chip off. You're going to lose that material. Typically, you want your friability to be below 1 or 2%. It's particularly important if tablets are going to be pan coated, because during a pan coating process, they're tumbled extensively. They're tumbled, usually for an hour or more is pretty common. So you don't want to be rounding off your square tablets in the process of coating them. It's just a measure of how durable your tablets are, how resistant they are to erosion during handling.
When you talk about tablet manufacture, what is and how are coatings applied? Because I hear that term all the time. And when you look at a tablet and you pull it out of a jar, there's several coatings and thickness and things like that. How is that done?
The most common way is, and there's some variations on this theme, but the most common way is pan coating. Essentially, what pan coating is, you can think of a pan coater as similar to a clothing dryer. So you put the tablets in. It's like similar to a clothing dryer with a spray function inside. So imagine putting tablets into a clothing dryer and then inserting your arm and spray painting them as they tumble in the dryer. What the dryer does is, as they're tumbling, there's warm air coming in one side. You're applying spray to the tablets. So they're moving through this zone where a mist of spray is applied. And, over time, by moving through this zone where the spray is applied and then they're blown with hot air and then spray is applied and blown with hot air, over time, over, the course of an hour or so and many, many tumbles in the machine, the tablets are evenly coated without clumping together. Yeah. So you want to fine tune your spray rate. You want to fine tune your inlet air temperature. You want to fine tune your gut to bed distance and your atomizing air pressure, which is, something that controls your droplet size. It's very important. Too big of droplets aren't going to dry fast, and they could lead to tablets sticking together, and you could have like one big piece of granola almost inside your coater. There's also a less common technique that's more antiquated would be pan coating, but using sugar by hand. Actually, some over-the-counter products are coated with a process similar to this, where an operator actually ladles in some sort of coating liquid that's typically, sugar solution with some sort of colorant or a pacifier like titanium dioxide. And the tablets are tumbled without the airflow. It's more of a operator technique-driven method, and it's something that it's the old way. It used to be done decades ago.
Literally sugarcoating it. Okay, I've got
Sugar,
one more.
Sugar in the pan.
That's right. Yeah,
you can keep going, Brian. You're on a roll.
In your experience, what is the wackiest drug product dosage form you've come across where you scratched your head and said, well, whoever thought this was a good idea? So what's the wackiest dosage form you've come across?
I've come across a situation where I was working on a rheumatoid arthritis product, working on a generic version of it, and the innovator filed for pediatric exclusivity for a rheumatoid arthritis product, which I thought was kind of interesting because I didn't even know that was possible for small children to have rheumatoid arthritis. But that would be one. In terms of dosage form, I worked on some pretty unique orally disintegrating tablets made by a process known as a triturate machine. Essentially, the formulation is primarily synthetic sugars, with other excipients in there. And what you're doing is almost making something like a Smarties candy that's going to be able to dissolve in the mouth relatively quickly. It was a unique process. You don't see it very often, and that's probably the wackiest dosage form, because those tablets were uniquely brittle and friable. I mean, they're made to dissolve very fast in your mouth before you even swallow them. But yeah, that would be one.
So handling was a problem. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, who doesn't like Smarties, by the way? They're like, they rival and they compete. They can go up against Reese's Cups. I'm just saying, right?
Yeah, they've been around. Yeah, I know.
Different formulation, obviously. Different formulation.
You're talking about the Smarties, the stuff that you draw on chalkboards, right?
No, it's
oh my
pure sugar.
Goodness. No.
Sugar deliciousness.
That's what it reminds me of, is chalk.
No, anything except that.
Nico wafers.
Nico wafers, yes, exactly. I used to work next to the Nico plant in Boston, and the original Nico plant.
No.
Yeah, if you want to settle your kids down, if you're busy there, just give them a couple Smarties and you'll see.
Yeah.
No, we're Sweet Tart family.
Yeah.
All right, I have a question, Q, actually, and I grew up in the era of quality by design. I almost forgot how it was pronounced. QBD, right? And I was never really familiar with the drug product side because I never worked in manufacturing, and Big Pharma created this. Actually, some guy named Kaoru Ishikawa. Do you know him?
Ishikawa diagrams? Yes.
Yeah, fishbone diagrams. So there's myths and facts about this. I mean, I can you talk to us about a little? I mean, I'd like to know, just friability. What is this fishbone diagram?
Well, I guess it's a way to break down contributing factors to a particular output you have. So, for, let's say, tablet dissolution, you could there's many factors that could affect tablet dissolution. And, if you're having an issue with the dissolution of your tablets, you might want to prepare an Ishikawa diagram to try to steer you where to look, steer you where to try to diagnose the problem. The dissolution would be the end of the fishbone diagram, and you would think, okay, what aspects of tablet production go into dissolution? Well, broadly speaking, you could at least say formulation, process, storage conditions, and then you can break those down further into, for the formulation, you can break it down into degree of disintegrant, degree of super disintegrant, granulation endpoints, binder selection. For the process, you could come up with in-process disintegration as a proxy for your early dissolution time points. You could come up with compression force, tablet hardness as contributing factors from the process side into dissolution. From the storage, you could look at hot and cold conditions and packaging configurations, and how your dissolution varies with those things. You applying prior process knowledge. Once you break down the contributing factors, as far as makes sense, you apply prior process knowledge to rule some things out and concentrate what you think could be the causes of the issue. After going through this exercise, you could say, okay, we think that from the formulation standpoint, we think that the degree of super disintegrant is important. And from the process standpoint, we think the hardness is important. And from the storage aspect, we think the amount of moisture permeability in the packaging is important. You would evaluate, you would do further work to demonstrate which of those things is contributing to your issue and the degree to which they're contributing.
Okay, so like other industries, using it to design your product, look for to weed out quality defect prevention. To me, again, it looks like a fish's skeleton. And the problems at the head and the causes for the problem or throughout the body, and it was always interesting to me. Brian, any other technical last minute jokes?
No, I'm actually not that funny.
Any zingers? You have any yogiisms?
No, I really don't have. I'm not that funny. Yeah, like I said, once
Anyhow, like a clown?
after Jim quoted Yogi Berra, it's all kind of downhill from there. I don't know.
Right.
No, I think this was really good. I was very helpful to me to hear you go through this.
Well, thanks. It was fun.
So now more than in the past, the development reports and conformance sections of your pharmaceutical development pieces, afford the opportunity to craft discussions for the reviewers, put forward arguments, talk about explanations and justifications in the program, so that the supportive data can be highlighted and less than stellar findings can be put in perspective. These reports and these sections influence the perspective of the reviewers more than the past. So if it's preferable to tackle some of these difficult issues head on rather than wait for reviewers to notice the problematic data during the review. So once again, Kyriakos Michailaros, live from Brooklyn, New York. I forgot to mention that. Still haven't been able to visit you. Obviously, the last couple of months have been different, right? But thanks so much. We appreciate it. And we look for you to come back. On our next episode, we'll have no other than the famous Hedley Rees, author of many, many books. One of them I think I wrote a chapter for. Hedley brings a lot of information and history and experiences on supply chains. This is definitely one you're going to want to check out. Hedley will be live from the UK.
Thanks for listening. To read the full show notes for this episode, which include a summary, timestamps, and any links mentioned in this episode, please visit dsinformatics.com/podcast. There you'll find the information from this episode and any past episodes. If you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a rating and a review at ratethispodcast.com/CMC Live. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.